Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Daily Bolt with your host, Dr. Jeff Tilley. Today's topic, California wildfires, climate change, forest mismanagement, or both. Sit back and relax and enjoy today's episode of the Daily Bolt. So as you have noticed, this is a video edition of the Daily Bolt, and there will be more of these coming, and we will have a slightly different setup going forward. But I wanted to start this one off with video, coming back after our hiatus, and that is actually the whole intent of the new format, is to do more in the way of video and less in audio. So we will still put audio up onto Podbean, but we will also be doing a lot of video on Facebook as well as other places. So I wanted to get you used to that. And this is a topic tonight which is kind of a barn burner, and we may take more than one episode to get through with this. But nonetheless, we're going to go ahead and tackle it anyway. It's been a bad summer for wildfires in the West, and many other episodes of this particular podcast have highlighted that. And it's the sort of thing that ultimately we want to be able to figure out. Is it really due to climate change, as Gavin Newsom and many others are claiming? Is it totally due to forest mismanagement, as Donald Trump and others are claiming? Or is it really what happens with many things? It's a little bit of both. And I think I'm going to make an argument that it's certainly a little bit of both. It is not difficult to argue that this has been a hot, dry summer in the West. We have gone for quite a few weeks without any sort of wetting rain for much of the western quarter of the U.S. It has been the 9th driest summer, and actually the 9th driest water year, all the way back from last October. In far western Nevada, where I live, it has been similarly dry throughout the Sierra Nevada, throughout the California Central Valley, and even in places farther north along the Cascade Ranges and the coastal ranges. And that's why all of this timber, which had a lot of growth over preceding couple of winters with lots of rain, and that followed multiple years of drought, this really sets the forest up for a bad summer if you have things like dry thunderstorms, careless people, any sort of triggers for wildfires, particularly when with the thunderstorms you get a lot of winds that make these thunderstorms spiral up as fast as possible. And so the question is, we know that this has been a hot year and it's been a dry year. As I said, in western Nevada, it's the 9th driest year, so it is not the overall driest year. It is also not overall the hottest year, though it has been persistently on the warm side and the dry side for months here, as well as in California, as well as in Arizona. And we still have at least another week, maybe two, before we get really significant rainfall in some of these areas, as the storm track slowly starts to wind its way south, and we may even get to entrain some tropical moisture into that. Regardless, we're still in a situation where it's very easy to generate fires, and since we've had a decade where we had multiple years of drought in the West, particularly in California and Nevada, Arizona, other parts of the Colorado River Basin, a few wet years, and now we have another very dry year. It can be argued that, okay, we haven't seen this for a very long time, and that's true in terms of this sequence of years of drought, a couple wet years, and then what was more or less a normal year, the previous water year, going from October 2018 to September of 2019, and now a very dry year once again. So I could put up the statistics, the charts that have been shown indicating that, yes, we have had a relatively warm warming trend in the climate over the past couple of decades. Though one always needs to keep in mind, and this is never said anymore, at least in terms of any of the mainstream news media reports or even on various websites, that we're looking at this from a baseline of periods where the climate may have been actually abnormally cool. This is a point that gets more or less swept under the rug, especially when the comparisons are made to the 1970s, early 1980s, which was a period that does appear to have been abnormally cool in the relative scheme of things. And that makes the warming we've had in the 21st century seem that much more significant because people don't remember the fact that it was actually a relatively cool climate in the years that they're all referencing back from their childhood memories. They say, we didn't have the degree of hot weather that we do now. Well, no, we didn't back then. But it was a period where it was a relatively cooler cycle to the climate. So that has to be always taken into account. However, it is not in dispute that the last couple decades have had a significant number of warm years, particularly in the western United States, and dry years. That gives you the ingredients for wildfire. The question is now, what is the forest management part of this equation? And it turns out that this is actually something that is also being conveniently overlooked, and I will say that I would believe that the current administration has a point in saying that there has been some mismanagement of the forests. I've brought up on my screen this report. There's actually, this is a report that comes all the way back from 1994, talking about flawed efforts to balance economic and environmental needs with respect to forest management. We can fast forward this 2 decades to a report in 2018. This is a report from an independent agency. It's not associated with the state government of California. In fact, it's a state government watchdog. But this first line in the overview is telling. In this report, the Commission calls for transformational culture change in its forest management practices. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, reported in December 2017 that approximately 27 million trees had died statewide on federal, state, and private lands. And this is all for the California forests in the Sierra Nevada range. The tally brought to 129 million the number of trees that have died in California forests during years of drought and bark beetle infestation since 2010. This brings up another piece of the puzzle, a bark beetle infestation crisis that has occurred in the last decade within California forests. It doesn't necessarily matter what the climate is if you have bugs that are going wild and killing trees. Now, granted, those bark beetle populations may be climate sensitive, and I'm not going to address that in today's podcast. What I am addressing is the fact that there have been studies by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, this commission. There are others that are out there that are referenced in this particular report that bring up the fact that California's forest management policy has not kept up with the fact of all of these trees dying. You have all this fuel around, you have dry weather. Of course, the wood's going to dry out. But there were all of these regulations in place effectively preventing logging companies and others from getting rid of those dead trees. In fact, there was so much regulatory red tape involved in getting rid of dead trees in California's forest, no matter what the agency was that's really responsible for it, because the state ultimately has some authority to put regulatory practices in place, that a lot of these trees never got taken care of. and you have all these dead trees that are still hanging around California forests, although many of them are burning this summer and even into this fall. You wonder why these fires get so big so quickly. Dead trees are a good way of thinking about that, because a dead tree has very low moisture content left in it. It burns very rapidly, as opposed to healthy trees that have sap. They have water content within the bark, within the branches, within the needles or the leaves, and they are slower to burn. So there's more to this report, and I'm going to talk about this report more going forward in some future podcasts, but it just brings to mind the fact that, okay, there's been criticism of California's forest management practices for years. It did not start with Donald Trump. It will not end with Donald Trump. Certainly, you can go back and find even that report in 1994, 20-some years ago, that was already critical of California's timber management practices, which did not change significantly. And here's the key. If you have a climate change, if you believe there is climate change going on, shouldn't you think about changing the way you manage forests? And in thinking ahead, you might have considered the fact that a hotter, drier climate might lead to more problems with dead trees that you're just leaving to sit around. I suppose you could say hindsight is 20/20, but even back in the 1990s, these concerns were being raised. So I think while you may be tempted to just blame climate change, you really need to also blame the state governments of California and probably Washington and Oregon as well. I have not seen any specific reports about Washington and Oregon, but it does stand to reason that probably similar forest management practices have been in place to some degree, and they may contribute as well to what's gone on there. Although those fires have been, fortunately, able to benefit from westerly winds off the Pacific, bringing some very welcome rains that have helped those fires get a little bit more under control than they were. Certainly, the smoke problem is not what it was about 3 weeks ago, and as we get more and more into the winter season, the fires in Oregon and Washington certainly have a better shot of getting rainfall to assist the firefighters in their efforts there. We still have a few more weeks to go farther south in California, Nevada, Arizona, and Utah. I'm going to wrap up this special video podcast at this point. We're going to come back to this topic probably in at least 1 or 2 podcasts next week. We're going to dive a little more deeply into some of these issues. But for now, I'm Dr. Jeff Tilley. We're back with the Daily Bolt. Have a good night, good morning, good afternoon. And if you've got some dead trees in your yard, cut them down.